My brother once called me a failure with a diploma. He said I'd never make it in the real world. Last week, I stood across from him in court, and when the judge said, "Ms. Miller, the floor is yours," he finally realized who he was up against. My name is Elena Miller, and in my family I was always the quiet one. Not in a charming, mysterious way, but in the kind of silence people resent. I didn't make jokes at the table. I didn't interrupt. I just watched. I studied. And somewhere along the way, that made me the outsider. Maybe you felt that too. That odd ache of being in a room full of people who share your blood, but none of your rhythm. My brother, Mason, was the golden boy. Loud, confident, always the center of attention. He had a joke for everything, a story for every silence. My mother clung to him like a badge of honor, her proof that she'd done something right in this life. When he failed a class, it was the teacher's fault. When I got an A, it was because you had more time, you don't really have friends. It was subtle but consistent. I stopped expecting applause and started aiming for distance. Mason loved to poke at me. Still reading those boring books? You really think a diploma is going to make you rich? People like us don't make it, Elena. You're not built for the real world. I laughed it off for years, like it didn't hurt. Like it didn't curl inside me and stay there. But what could I say? He was the charming one, the loud one, the one who could do no wrong, even when he did everything wrong. When I graduated from law school, my father shook my hand. My mother sighed and asked if I'd be moving out soon. Mason didn't even show up. He sent a text. Congrats, I guess. Hope the debt was worth it. I remember staring at those words and wondering what would happen if I just disappeared. Would they notice? Would it even matter? That night, I promised myself something. If they didn't care who I was becoming, they didn't need to know who I became. I moved to another city. Quietly. No big farewell, no dinner, no drama. Just boxes and a U-Haul. I got a job in a mid-sized firm and worked like a ghost. Early mornings. Late nights. No parties. No distractions. I watched others network with champagne in their hands. I was still sipping burnt coffee at my desk. And slowly, silently, I got good. Not flashy good. Not social media good. But solid. Clients trusted me. Colleagues leaned on me. I started winning cases. But every time I came home for a holiday, when I still tried, they asked the same questions. Still doing that lawyer thing? Are you ever going to settle down? Mason got a new car, you should see it. And I would nod. Smile. Pretend I didn't feel the weight of being the family's biggest disappointment and maybe their biggest threat. Mason had a way of taking up all the space in the room. He didn't do it maliciously, at least not always. He just believed the world revolved around him. And the truth is, in our house, it kind of did. If he lost a job, we'd all tiptoe for weeks. If I landed a new client, it barely made it past the mashed potatoes. I learned to stop talking about work, to stop trying, to just sit there and let the silence grow thicker. Sometimes I wonder if my mother ever saw me. Not the girl she wanted me to be, not the version of me that existed only in comparison to Mason, but me. The woman who held herself together through law school, who built something out of nothing, who kept choosing grace when she could have chosen resentment. But I guess some people only love loudness. They don't know what to do with quiet. And I was always quiet. There's one Thanksgiving that sealed it for me. Mason made some joke, can't even remember what it was now, about me being the family scholar who makes nothing happen. Everyone laughed. Even my dad chuckled. My mother just said, he's not wrong, you know. I remember looking at her, really looking, and realizing I didn't owe them anything anymore. Not updates, not explanations, not the chance to prove myself. So I stopped going back. I built my firm quietly, chose a name that didn't carry mine, Vanguard Legal Group, hired brilliant people, trained them myself. Within 3 years, we were representing regional chains. By year 5, we were handling national accounts. CEOs knew my name. Journalists tried to write profiles. I declined most of them because I wasn't building this to be seen. I was building it to exist, whether they clapped for it or not. Sometimes I'd hear through distant cousins how Mason was doing, always chasing the next big thing. A startup, a crypto investment, a lawsuit he was definitely going to win, I never asked. I never needed to know, because I had already let go of that old hunger, the need to be acknowledged by people who only saw my silence as failure. Still, I won't lie to you. When I heard his name on that case file, saw his name on the lawsuit against one of our clients, something in me stilled. Not out of fear, not out of excitement, but that deep, private shift inside a person who knows. The past just circled back. And this time, I'd get the last word. Graduating law school should have felt like a finish line, or at least a beginning. But for me, it felt more like a whisper in a room where no one was listening. I stood there with my degree in hand, wearing the same black gown as everyone else, while their families cried, clapped, celebrated. Mine sent a text. My mom said she was proud but didn't want to deal with the drive. My dad was working. Mason never responded, and I just smiled at the crowd like I didn't feel invisible. I took a picture alone in front of the building, holding my diploma with both hands. I didn't post it. What was I going to write? Made it, despite everyone hoping I wouldn't. The truth is, even I wasn't sure what came next. Law school teaches you how to think, not how to survive. And I didn't have connections, a family firm, or anyone to pull strings for me. Just a degree that didn't shine in a world obsessed with status. I landed my first job at a modest firm in a downtown office that smelled like mildew and ambition. The carpet was stained, the lighting too harsh, and the partners too tired. But I worked. Hard. Took the cases nobody wanted. Drafted motions on weekends. Stayed quiet and observant in meetings. People noticed. Not the loud ones, the smart ones. The ones who didn't need flash to recognize fire. After 2 years, I started thinking about leaving. Not because I hated it, but because I knew I was never going to become anything more there. They had already decided who I was, a reliable associate. The kind who wouldn't leave early, wouldn't complain, wouldn't rise. I could have stayed, built a stable career, but something in me still burned quietly. A need, not for revenge, but for freedom. So I left. No big announcement. No going away party. Just a letter of resignation and a quiet goodbye. I rented a tiny office on the edge of the city, painted the walls myself, ordered secondhand furniture, and opened a legal practice with a name no one could tie to me. Vanguard Legal Group. It sounded bigger than it was. It sounded like something that mattered. And that was enough for me. In the beginning, I took anything. Landlord-tenant disputes, trademark filings, messy contract negotiations for people too angry to read fine print. I kept my rates low and my voice steady. Slowly, the calls increased. People talked. Clients referred clients. Small businesses, startups, tech companies. They liked that I didn't overpromise, that I didn't pretend to be more than I was. But they learned quickly I delivered. And still, I didn't tell my family. When they asked what I was doing, I said, just consulting. When they asked where I worked, I said, downtown. I let them believe I was struggling, that I was clinging to scraps, because explaining my growth felt like offering them something they never valued anyway. Let them think I was barely getting by. Let them sleep well at night, believing the family hierarchy was intact. The truth was I was building something. Carefully, intentionally, I hired one assistant, then another, a junior attorney, a paralegal, moved offices, started offering corporate retainers. My firm became the quiet backbone for dozens of companies that didn't want headlines, just results. We weren't flashy, but we were sharp, precise, ruthless when needed. My name never went on the signage. I didn't need it to. Sometimes I get emails from journalists looking to do up-and-coming attorney profiles. I ignored them, not because I wasn't proud, but because I didn't want attention. Not that kind. I wasn't doing this for applause. I was doing it because it mattered. Because after years of being talked over and looked through, building something that spoke for itself was enough. And in that silence, I thrived. Mason, meanwhile, was all noise. Social media posts about side hustles and big wins. Stories from relatives about how he was working on something huge. One week he was launching a fitness app, the next he was buying into a restaurant. He had charm, sure, but no anchor, no discipline, just noise wrapped in confidence. I never reached out. I never offered advice or asked questions. He didn't ask either. To him, I was still the quiet girl with her head in a book, the one who didn't understand how the real world works. And I let him believe that, because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's a wall. One you build brick by brick, so no one gets close enough to burn you again. There were nights I thought about telling my parents what I was building, about the companies we were now handling, the contracts I had negotiated, the courtroom wins that made seasoned lawyers nod in respect. But then I'd remember that graduation day, the empty chairs, the missing faces, the text that said, "Congrats, I guess." And I'd go back to work. Quietly, proudly. I kept my world separate. My clients didn't know about my family. My family didn't know about my clients. It was cleaner that way. Safer. I wasn't hiding out of shame. I was hiding because peace costs less when you don't have to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And then one day, one ordinary Monday morning, I opened a case file. Plaintiff, Mason Miller. Defendant, one of our biggest clients. He was suing for wrongful termination. Claimed damages in the millions. Said he'd already spoken to the media. And I sat there, staring at his name, smiling like someone who had just found the final piece of a long, quiet puzzle. Mason always believed the world owed him something. Maybe it was the way he was raised. Maybe it was how easily people forgave his charm, but he carried that entitlement like a shield. He didn't work harder than anyone else. He just worked louder. And for most of his life, that was enough. Enough to get noticed. Enough to get opportunities. Enough to make people believe he was the kind of man who always landed on his feet. But landing isn't the same as building. He bounced between ventures the way some people change playlists. Real estate, event planning, crypto. At one point, he was selling supplements through an exclusive wellness brand, which was just another word for a pyramid scheme with better branding. Every time we heard from a cousin or neighbor about Mason's latest thing, my mother would beam. That boy is always chasing greatness. She never noticed he was also always running from accountability. Eventually, he landed a job at a growing tech company. Sleek offices, open floor plans, unlimited coffee. He posted a photo on Instagram of the logo behind the receptionist's desk with the caption, "Leveling up. Watch this space." The comments flooded in. Congratulations, fire emojis, digital high fives. But behind all the filters and hashtags, I knew Mason. He wasn't built for structure. He liked fast wins, not slow climbs. He liked applause, not process. And structure is what brought him down. From what I gathered, he got into an argument with his manager. Something about vision, misalignment. That's how he phrased it, anyway. Said they didn't understand his ideas. That he was being strategically silenced. That's the phrase he used in his lawsuit. Said they sabotaged his project, blocked his promotions, and then quietly pushed him out so they could steal his concepts. According to him, it was corporate betrayal at its worst. A textbook case of wrongful termination. He wasn't just angry. He was excited. He truly believed he had them cornered. Started talking like a man who'd already won. "I've got proof," he told people. Emails, Slack messages, everything. "This is gonna blow up. I might even go public with it." He made calls, took meetings, posted vague tweets about standing up to giants. Said things like, "This isn't just for me, it's for everyone who's ever been stepped on by a company." He was playing the victim turned hero, the underdog in a suit. The problem was, he actually believed the performance. He hired a lawyer who loved headlines more than legal codes, the kind who cared more about drama than evidence. And Mason loved that. They crafted a narrative, not a strategy. One that made him look like the visionary, the whistleblower, the David with a slingshot made of screenshots. And when they filed the lawsuit, Mason didn't flinch. He walked into that courthouse like it was a movie set, and he was finally the lead. He was so sure of himself, so absolutely convinced that this was his moment, that this case would not only bring him money, but attention, credibility, maybe even interviews. He said the company had underestimated the wrong guy, that they'd settle fast to avoid noise, that he'd walk away with 7 figures and a smug smile. And I'm sure that would have happened if he hadn't chosen that company, if he hadn't filed against a firm that happened to be on my client list. When I saw the case on my desk, my first instinct was confusion. The name was too familiar. Mason Miller, my brother, filing a multimillion-dollar suit against one of our oldest, most loyal clients. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I read the claim. The tone, the arrogance woven through every line like a signature. And I knew. I didn't even have to see his face to recognize the story. He thought this would be easy. Thought the company would panic. Thought the firm representing them would be overwhelmed. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the firm handling the case wasn't just a firm. It was my firm, Vanguard Legal Group. The same firm he had no idea I'd built from the ground up, because I never told him. I never told any of them. And now here we were, the golden boy of the family, the hero of no one, filing a lawsuit he thought would make him powerful, not realizing the person on the other side of the courtroom wasn't just any defense attorney, but the sister he had mocked, dismissed, and ignored. The failure with a diploma. The one who didn't understand the real world. The one he never bothered to ask about. I remember staring at the file and feeling nothing. Not anger. Not joy. Just stillness. Like a clock had stopped ticking and everything had gone quiet. I thought about declining the case. Thought about passing it to someone else. But then I remembered every comment. Every time he rolled his eyes when I spoke. Every holiday dinner where I was the punchline. Every moment he stood taller by pushing me lower. And I made my decision. I'd take the case. I'd do it the right way. No personal jabs. No emotional outbursts. Just facts. Just law. And when the time came, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't gloat. I'd simply do my job and let the silence say everything he never let me say. When my assistant handed me the folder, she didn't say anything. Just looked at me in that quiet way she does when something deserves my personal attention. I took it, opened the cover, and there it was, his name. Plaintiff, Mason Miller. I sat back in my chair and just stared at it. I didn't move. Didn't blink. For a long moment, I didn't even breathe. Of all the companies he could have sued, of all the firms that could have taken the case, he landed in my orbit. By accident. By fate. Or maybe just by the way karma doesn't knock, it signs court documents. I read through the complaint again. Slowly this time. He really believed he had something. Screenshots, loosely quoted meetings, vague implications wrapped in self-importance. I'd seen it before. Entitlement pretending to be injustice. It's not rare, but it was rare to see it written in my brother's voice, packaged like a weapon he never expected I'd be holding back against him. I could have handed the case off. It wouldn't have been difficult. I had a dozen senior associates, more than capable of handling it. We had procedures for conflict of interest, protocols for recusals, but none of them applied. He wasn't family in the legal sense. No shared assets, no business ties, no spousal connection. Just blood. Just history. Just all the words that never got said out loud. So I took it. I booked myself as lead counsel. My calendar cleared. My team didn't ask questions, they trusted my choices. That was the thing about building something from the ground up. When you lead with consistency, no one second-guesses your silence. They just follow. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I arrived early as always. Sat quietly in the corner of the defense table, organizing notes, highlighting key points. I wore a navy suit, simple lines, no jewelry except my watch. Hair pulled back. Glasses on. I didn't want to be recognized, not yet. I wanted the moment to unfold naturally. I wanted to see how long it would take him to notice. The courtroom slowly filled. His attorney came in first, loud tie, louder ego. I recognized him immediately. A performer. Good in front of cameras, sloppy with details. Mason entered right after, wearing a suit just a little too tight in the shoulders, talking too loud on his phone, trying to look like someone important. He didn't glance at the defense table. Didn't even pause when he passed me. Just walked to his seat like the room belonged to him. I sat still. Didn't shift. Didn't turn. Just listened. He was bragging. Whispering to his lawyer, grinning. They're going to offer a settlement. Just watch. His attorney nodded, clearly amused. They always do, Mason added. Companies like this fold the minute they see pressure. I wrote the phrase down. Companies like this. He hadn't seen me yet. And maybe that was the part that stuck with me most. How easy it was for him to overlook me in a room I was meant to command. How natural it was for him to assume I'd be nowhere near the real fight. That I'd still be the girl in the corner, quiet, forgettable. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Introductions began. Opposing counsel stood, stated his name, his firm. Then it was our turn. I rose. Steady voice. Clear breath. Elena Miller, representing the defendant. The room shifted. Mason turned, slowly. At first, with a smirk like he misheard. I watched it hit him. First the twitch in his brow, then the stiffness in his jaw, and finally the weight of recognition. Then the realization that I was not just in the room. I was the one standing between him and everything he thought he was about to win. He looked to his lawyer, who was already flipping through papers, whispered something. The lawyer's eyebrows shot up. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, just handed a document to the bailiff, as if it were any other day, any other case. Because for me it was. Mason leaned forward, tried to catch my eye. I didn't look at him, not because I was avoiding anything, but because I'd already seen enough. This wasn't about stares. This was about silence, about every moment he thought I was beneath him, every word he never thought would echo back. The judge continued, set the tone, denied a last-minute request for a delay. Mason's lawyer mumbled something about potential conflict, needing time to verify. The judge asked plainly, do you have grounds to prove misconduct or bias? He didn't. The motion was denied. The case would proceed. I sat down, calm, focused, not because I didn't feel anything, but because I'd already felt it all before. The hurt, the doubt, the years of pretending I was fine when I wasn't. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't anger. This was something colder, cleaner. It was closure dressed in legal code. The hearing moved forward. Procedural items. Scheduling. But every few seconds I could feel his eyes. Like he still hadn't accepted it. Like he was still waiting for someone to say it was a mistake. That I wasn't really the Elena Miller standing there. That I wasn't the one holding the file, asking the judge for deadlines, flipping through evidence he never thought I'd see. I never looked back at him. Not once. Because the truth is, there was nothing left to see. He had walked into that courtroom thinking he'd win easily, that his voice would be the loudest. But the loudest sound in that room was my silence. He kept glancing at me like I might disappear if he blinked long enough. Like this was some elaborate prank, and any second now the rail defense attorney would walk in, and I'd go back to being the ghost he was used to ignoring. But I was there, hair pulled back, suit pressed, notes in order, calm, steady, undeniable. He was still trying to figure out if I had followed the case by coincidence or if this was some kind of setup. And I could almost see the thought forming in his head. She's not capable of this. Because that was the story he had written about me since we were kids. And when a man builds his entire sense of superiority around the belief that you are beneath him, watching that belief crack in real time is something else entirely. He whispered something to his lawyer, who immediately stood and tried again to delay the hearing. Said we needed time to assess recent developments, as if the only development was me standing where he never expected I'd be. The judge didn't entertain it. His honor was sharp, seasoned, and had no patience for drama disguised as strategy. He asked plainly if there was a conflict of interest. There wasn't. Asked if the plaintiff had any objections supported by law. They didn't. Motion denied. Proceed. Mason's face tightened. His jaw clenched in that familiar way, like when we were younger and he got caught lying but wouldn't admit it. Like when he realized that charm had its limits. He didn't look at me anymore. He looked through me. But I wasn't there to meet his gaze. I was there to do my job. I stood, introduced the defense position, outlined the nature of the claim and how we intended to challenge it. I didn't raise my voice, didn't perform, just stated facts with clarity. The room adjusted to the tone I set, professional, grounded, composed. Even the judge nodded once, the way they do when they know the person speaking has done their homework. Mason shifted in his seat. His lawyer flipped pages, looking for something to hold on to. I began with the timeline, emails, correspondence, internal documentation. We had evidence that not only contradicted his claim, but showed clear procedural fairness in his termination. There were warnings, meetings, documentation of non-compliance. I laid it out in sequence. No drama, just precision. The kind of slow, steady dismantling that doesn't feel like a hit until you realize the floor beneath you is gone. And still, I didn't look at him. Not because I couldn't, but because it wasn't necessary. He wasn't the audience. The court was. The facts were. And more than anything, I was. Every sentence I delivered, every piece of evidence I submitted, was a quiet reminder that I didn't need to shout to be heard. I never did. His attorney tried to interrupt, question the relevance of an email chain. The judge asked if he had reviewed the exhibits. He hadn't. I kept going. Presented witness statements, policies signed, acknowledgments filed. The case wasn't just weak. It was built on ego and assumption. And I could see with each passing minute Mason shrinking in his seat, not physically, but in the way people do when they finally realize the stage they climbed onto wasn't built for them. There was a moment, midway through my opening presentation, when I mentioned a conversation Mason had with his supervisor, one that he had conveniently omitted from his filing. I read directly from the transcript. His exact words, his tone unfiltered. The room went quiet, except for the sound of my voice. And when I finished reading, I let the silence carry just long enough. Not as a tactic, but because some truths don't need embellishment. They just need air. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mason's attorney scribbled notes. And Mason, he looked down. I kept going. Not to punish him, not to humiliate, but because this was what I was trained to do. And I wasn't going to dim that because the person across the aisle happened to share my last name. That was the thing he never understood. My silence growing up wasn't weakness. It was restraint. My absence wasn't failure. It was choice. And now, standing in a courtroom I had earned my way into, representing a client who trusted me not because of who I was, but because of what I'd proven, I felt no rage. Just readiness. By the time I finished, the judge called for a recess. I returned to my seat, calm. Mason didn't move. He just sat there, hands clasped, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Like maybe if he stared at the table long enough, the story would shift back to the one he was comfortable with. The one where he was the victim, and I was the disappointment. But that story didn't hold up anymore. Not in this courtroom. Not in front of witnesses. Not when faced with someone who had stopped waiting for validation and started writing her own verdicts. I didn't walk out of that room triumphant. I didn't need to. What I felt was steadier than victory. It was control. It was quiet power, the kind you don't announce, the kind that doesn't ask permission, the kind that simply is. He used to call me a background character. Said people like me never win because we don't make noise. But what he never learned is that some of us aren't in the background. We're just waiting for the right moment to step into the light. And when we do, we don't just speak. We redefine the silence. The second day of the hearing opened colder. Not because of the weather, but because of what was already in motion. Mason walked in less confident this time. No phone call on speaker, no casual smirks. His steps were tighter, his eyes scanning the room with more calculation than charisma. Maybe he was still hoping for a shift. Maybe he thought his lawyer had found a loophole overnight. Or maybe, finally, he started to understand he was playing a game where the rules didn't favor performance. The judge called the session to order, and I rose to continue the presentation. No drama, no surprise evidence, just the steady stream of truth, laid out like a blueprint. Every document had a timestamp. Every exchange had context. Every point connected to the next, like it had been waiting years to be said out loud. Because this wasn't just about the company being right. It was about Mason being wrong, in ways he was never used to being called out for. I introduced an internal report, one he had signed but conveniently forgot to mention in his claim. It detailed missed deadlines, unapproved expenditures, multiple warnings about workplace behavior. His lawyer objected, of course. Relevance, he said. The judge overruled. I kept going. I wasn't trying to bury Mason in paper. I was showing the court a map he thought no one had the patience to follow. But I had followed it, step by step. And with every new point, I watched it happen, his story unraveling, thread by thread. He had built a version of events where he was the visionary silenced by corporate greed. But the emails told a different story. A sloppy one. Late replies. Missed meetings. Passive-aggressive responses. He talked about being shut out of leadership discussions, but records showed he skipped half of them. He claimed he was excluded from strategic planning, but forgot he had declined 3 invitations himself. The facts didn't just poke holes. They rewrote the entire narrative. His lawyer fumbled, flipping through documents that didn't support his version. He whispered, shuffled papers, made scattered objections that didn't land. He wasn't prepared, not for this level of precision, not for someone who didn't need to bluff. And Mason, who had probably imagined this courtroom moment as his personal comeback, sat there watching the walls close in with every page I turned. I never changed tone. That was the part that got to him, I think. That I didn't raise my voice, didn't roll my eyes, didn't take any personal jabs. Because the deeper I went, the more obvious it became. I didn't need revenge. I had proof. And proof doesn't shout. It doesn't stumble. It doesn't beg to be believed. It simply holds the room until there's nothing left to say. At one point, I introduced a timeline comparison. One side showed Mason's public statements, tweets, interviews, claims about being sabotaged by a jealous manager. The other side showed calendar logs, actual records from the company. Side by side, the contradictions weren't just embarrassing, they were undeniable. The judge asked for clarification on one entry. I answered smoothly. His lawyer hesitated, then offered an explanation, so thin it dissolved halfway through. Mason leaned forward, hands clasped, jaw tight. I don't know what he was thinking in that moment. Maybe he realized that no one else was coming to save him, that the courtroom wasn't a stage and I wasn't just a supporting role. I was the one setting the tempo, and he couldn't dance to a rhythm he never learned to respect. Still, I stayed composed. Not because it didn't mean something, but because it meant too much. If I let even a crack of emotion show, it would have turned the whole thing into a spectacle. And this wasn't a spectacle. It was justice. Clean, steady, deliberate. I didn't want him to feel small. I just wanted the truth to feel bigger than both of us. He had always been the kind of person who thought confidence could replace preparation, that volume could drown out doubt. But in this room, none of that mattered. The judge didn't care how charming he used to be. The records didn't care how many people clapped for his ambition. The only thing that mattered now was what could be proven. And I could prove everything. By midday, I could feel the shift. The courtroom wasn't leaning in his direction anymore. The judge asked fewer questions to our side, more to theirs. His lawyer was on defense, scrambling to clarify, asking for extensions, trying to salvage a narrative that was collapsing under its own ego. Mason's shoulders were hunched now. He didn't interrupt. He didn't whisper. He just sat still, as if motion might make things worse. There was one moment, quick, barely noticeable, where he looked at me. Really looked. Not with arrogance, not with disbelief, but with something that almost resembled recognition. Like he was seeing me for the first time. Not the little sister he had dismissed. Not the quiet girl with her books, but the woman standing between him and the consequences he never thought he'd face. I didn't look back for long. Just enough to acknowledge what he never admitted. That this was no longer a story he controlled. We broke for recess. I stepped out into the hallway, not to breathe, but to reset. I wasn't tired. I was focused. I checked my notes. Reviewed my files. The rest of my team didn't say much. They didn't have to. We all knew where this was going. Mason stayed inside. I imagine he was trying to regroup, to spin what was happening into something survivable. But it was too late. The story he'd written was being edited in real time. And I held the pen now. The final day didn't feel like an ending. There was no music rising in the background, no dramatic entrance. Just a courtroom that smelled faintly of paper and old air, and a clock that ticked exactly the same as it had the day before. But something was different. You could feel it in the way Mason didn't talk that morning. The way he sat there, quiet, stiff, maybe hoping silence would now do what noise couldn't. I arrived early like always. Reviewed my notes one last time, not because I expected surprises, but because respect demands consistency, even at the finish line. My team was ready. Calm. The defense had done its part. There was nothing left to prove. We weren't chasing a win. We were simply waiting for the truth to be recognized. The judge entered and everyone stood. Mason barely moved. His lawyer looked more exhausted than defiant. There was no fire left to fan, just smoldering paper and broken arguments. The judge cleared his throat and began the ruling. His voice was steady, deliberate, like someone reading not just words, but weight. The claim was dismissed. Lack of evidence, contradictory testimony, failure to meet the burden of proof. The courtroom didn't gasp. No one flinched. But Mason's shoulders fell, like the words physically hit him. Then came the second part. The judge turned to my side of the table, acknowledged the time spent, the documentation presented, the thoroughness of the defense. And then with the same calm tone, he ruled that the plaintiff, that's Mason, was responsible for covering the legal fees incurred by the defendant. In other words, Mason would not only walk away empty-handed, he'd be paying for my work. I didn't look at him, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't need to. There was nothing in his face that could give me more than I already had. He wasn't going to apologize. He wasn't going to understand. He was going to react. And that's exactly what he did. His lawyer leaned over, whispering something fast, probably a plan for appeal. Mason stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he said, loud enough for the judge to pause mid-sentence. "She's my sister. This whole thing's a setup." The judge looked up, not with anger, but with a kind of tired disappointment. "Mr. Miller, your familial relationship was disclosed and ruled as non-conflictual at the start of proceedings. Your objections were noted and denied. The court's decision stands." Mason opened his mouth again, but his attorney grabbed his arm gently. "Let it go," he said, barely audible. It wasn't advice. It was surrender. I remained seated, quiet. I had nothing to add. No need to gloat. No point in reminding anyone that all of this, every single piece of it, could have been avoided if he'd just lived a life with a little more honesty and a little less ego. The judge wrapped the session. Papers were shuffled. People stood. The echo of chairs scraping the floor filled the space where arguments used to be. I gathered my notes slowly, methodically, like I had in every hearing before this one. But this wasn't like any hearing before. This was personal. And yet, I had handled it like it wasn't. That was the difference between us. Mason didn't move right away. He sat there, blinking like he was still waiting for someone to say they'd made a mistake, that the story could still be rewritten, that this wasn't the final version. But no one said a word, and silence in that moment was louder than anything he could have screamed. As I placed the last folder in my briefcase, I finally glanced his way. Just once. Just long enough to meet his eyes and let him know this hadn't been about revenge, that this had never been about him at all. He shook his head, half in disbelief, half in anger, like somehow I had betrayed him by becoming something more than what he could control. I walked out without a word. The hallway felt quieter than usual, or maybe I just noticed it more this time. My heels clicked against the floor like punctuation marks in a story that no longer needed a narrator. My team followed, respectful, silent. They didn't offer congratulations. That's what I loved about them. They understood that some victories don't need to be celebrated. They just need to be felt. Outside, the air was sharp, clean. I didn't rush to the car, didn't check my phone, just stood for a moment, letting the cold clear whatever emotion had tried to creep in. Not sadness, not pride, just release. I had done my job, not just as a lawyer, but as a woman who refused to be erased. Some people think winning feels like a rush, like lights and noise and fists in the air. But sometimes winning feels like stillness, like knowing you held your ground, like watching someone finally realize they've spent their whole life underestimating the wrong person. Mason used to say I was a shadow, that no one notices the quiet ones until it's too late. He was right, but the thing about shadows is they're always there, and when the light shifts, they take up the whole room. Mason didn't call them right away. He waited until he was home, until the hallway lights were off and the kitchen smelled like leftover coffee and quiet disappointment. He tossed his keys on the counter and sank into the couch like someone carrying more weight than just a loss. My parents had no idea the case was over. They didn't even know I was involved. To them, it was just another one of Mason's projects. Another big thing they expected to hear about when the money came rolling in. He started talking fast, frustrated, defensive, said the judge was biased, that the company had dug up stuff from his past, that the firm defending them had gone too far. And then he dropped the sentence that, until that moment, had never passed his lips in that house. Elena was the lawyer. Not my sister. Not your daughter. Just Elena. Like saying my name without attachment might soften the blow. My mother's reaction was immediate. "That doesn't make sense," she said, waving a hand like the idea itself was insulting. "Elena's not a real trial attorney. She works behind a desk or something." Mason didn't answer. Just sat there, eyes heavy, shoulders tighter. "Are you sure it was her?" she asked again, her voice sharper now, like the very thought of me being capable of something that mattered was too much to process. He didn't have to argue. He just pulled out his phone and showed her the court documents. My name. My signature. The firm's letterhead. Her mouth tightened. She went silent, then stood up and disappeared into the dining room where the old laptop sat, half buried in mail and grocery store flyers. The keyboard clicked louder than usual. Like every key she hit was fueled by disbelief. She started with my name, then added lawyer, then Vanguard Legal Group. And suddenly the silence shifted. Articles, press mentions, corporate awards, panel discussions, a photograph of me speaking at a conference, standing beside a senator, a quote where I talked about integrity in corporate litigation, another where a CEO called me one of the sharpest legal minds in the industry. My father had joined her by then. He leaned over the screen, reading slowly, the way he always did when he wasn't sure what to feel. Mason stayed on the couch. He didn't need to see it. He had lived it. "She's been hiding this from us," my mother said eventually, like success was something you owed the family in monthly updates. She could have told us. We could have helped her. But even she didn't believe her own words. Help me? The girl they barely looked at during dinners? The one they praised only in comparison to Mason's louder failures? She scrolled further, saw the list of companies my firm had represented, the settlements we'd negotiated, the cases we'd won, the politicians we'd faced down, the journalists we'd declined. And somewhere between the third and fourth article, the pride in her voice cracked. "This isn't right," she said again, but softer now. Then came the pivot. We could sue her for something. Conflict of interest, maybe. That has to be illegal. Defending a company against her own brother. But she was already reading a quote from the judge, citing the ruling. Legal. Clean. Ethical. Ironclad. Everything I had made sure it would be. They didn't say much after that. No accusations. No praise. Just the quiet weight of realization settling over a house that had never said my name with admiration. Only expectation. Only confusion. Only that dull irritation of not becoming who they imagined I'd be. And now that I had become something else entirely, someone successful, powerful, and untouchable, they didn't know where to put that version of me. They didn't call. They didn't text. They didn't even send one of those thin, passive emails my mother used to write when she wanted something, but didn't want to say it directly. They just went silent. Not out of respect. Not even out of shame. But because silence is the only tool left when control slips out of your hands. Mason didn't try to appeal. His lawyer probably convinced him it wasn't worth the money. Or maybe Mason just didn't have the fight left in him. He stopped posting online for a while. Took down a few of his old videos. The one where he bragged about standing up to billion-dollar companies vanished quietly. His name still shows up in the court registry, tied to a case he'll probably never mention again. I never reached out, not because I wanted distance, but because I had already accepted the truth. Some people will never celebrate you unless they get to claim a piece of your victory. And I had built every inch of this without them, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Growing in silence taught me things applause never could. That peace doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being undeniable. For years, they treated my name like a placeholder, something to use when the conversation turned to what could have been. Now, it was everywhere they looked, on court records, in articles, across headlines they never thought would include someone like me. And yet, they still couldn't say it out loud. My name was never spoken with pride in that house. It was a formality, a placeholder, a way to call someone to the table without ever truly inviting them in. I was Elena when they needed something, when I was late, when I didn't fit the image they had rehearsed over the years. But never Elena the woman. Never Elena the one becoming. Only Elena the background noise. And for a long time, I believed that if I just worked harder, just proved enough, eventually they'd hear me. That maybe one day Mason would look at me and see more than a girl with books. That maybe my mother would finally say my name without the sigh at the end. But that day never came. And eventually, I stopped needing it too. Because the world taught me something that home never did. That silence, when chosen, can be louder than anything you scream. And I chose it, over and over again. I didn't post my wins. I didn't chase applause. I didn't sit at holiday dinners listing achievements, hoping someone would ask more. I let them talk about Mason. Let them fill the room with stories of his almost successes. His near misses spun into brilliance. I nodded, smiled, and passed the potatoes. And all the while, I was building something they couldn't see and wouldn't know how to understand even if they tried. The courtroom changed that. Not because I made it change, but because truth has a way of standing up even when you don't push it. I didn't call them after the verdict. I didn't send the court transcript or forward the news articles. I didn't need to. The echo of my name in that courtroom was enough. It reached them whether they admitted it or not. And for the first time, they had to see me in a room where Mason couldn't rewrite the story. I think about that often. Not the win, but the moment before. That tiny breath, right before the judge said my name out loud. The defense is ready. Ms. Miller. The pause after. The weight that settled when I stood. That was the moment everything shifted. Not just for him, for me. Because I wasn't standing to be seen. I was standing because I belonged there. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to say I did. There's a strange freedom in not being believed. It teaches you to believe in yourself without needing confirmation. It teaches you to move forward without applause. It teaches you to hold your ground in silence and realize that silence can be a kind of armor, a quiet resistance, a soft refusal to give anyone the power to define your worth. And I don't resent them anymore. Not really. You can't resent people for not recognizing a language they never learned to hear. I speak in steady hands and clear strategy, in early mornings and sleepless nights, in contracts negotiated and wrongs quietly made right. They speak in noise, in appearance, in short stories that end before the hard work begins. We were never speaking the same language, but that doesn't mean I didn't wish at one point that they might try to translate. Still, here I am. Not needing the headline, not needing the credit, just here. And the name they never said with pride now lives on letterheads, legal directories, corporate records across the country. It opens doors, commands meetings, earns nods in boardrooms they've never stepped inside. Not because I fought to be seen, but because I refused to disappear. There are days I still feel that girl, the one at the table, quiet, unsure, waiting for someone to notice. But now I just smile at her. She got me here. Not because she spoke louder, but because she kept going. If you've ever felt that, like you were the shadow in someone else's spotlight, then maybe you understand. Maybe you've sat in silence too, hoping the right moment would come. Maybe you've waited, not to be celebrated, but to be understood. And maybe you stopped waiting. Because that's what I did. I stopped waiting for someone to say my name with pride. I said it myself, in rooms they never entered, at tables they never knew existed. And when my brother heard it, when the judge spoke it into the air with formality and authority, he finally realized what I had known for years. You don't have to raise your voice to be powerful. You don't have to fight to be real. You don't even have to be seen to make an impact. You just have to be undeniably who you are, whether or not they're looking. So if you've ever wanted to prove who you are, but chose the quiet path instead, if you've ever walked away from the noise, the need, the expectations, and just did the work, then maybe you get it. Maybe you know what it means to live without permission, to grow without praise, to become without applause. Maybe you, too, chose silence. And if you did, then you already know. It speaks louder than they ever will.